Hello, everyone. This is Jim Nasr. I'm one of the leads with the Coalition for Decentralized Health and Life Sciences. This is another one of our podcast series, and the focus today is on safe AI in healthcare. I think safe AI has been in the conversation for at least the entirety of 2026, if not a little bit longer, and it seems to be really relevant also in healthcare, and we have a great panel to discuss this. Just as a form of introduction, the Coalition for Decentralized Healthcare and Life Sciences is an industry body group. We work with the Blockchain Healthcare Journal, Blockchain Healthcare Today Journal, which is a peer-reviewed journal. And there's a number of industry leaders, who participate in this, including our panel here today. I'm Jim Nasr. I run a company called Acor. I'm the CEO. Our focus is building products that really use decentralized technologies as a way to provide verifiable transactions, verifiable data authenticity. If you're using AI to prove what we're doing, and we've been in business for a number of years, I very much believe in this idea of building technologies that have some safety built into them, that have ethical practices. With that being said, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague here, Jelani.
Hi, Dr. Jelani Clarke, neuroimmunologist by training. It's good to be here, Jim, on episode 2, I think, of what's going to become a running series. My background, as I mentioned, I'm a neuroimmunologist by training, but have taken off my scientific hat, I guess, in terms of hard science, to now work in the small and medium-sized biotech startup space. I'm part of a company called AminoChain that builds infrastructure to support more patient-centric research. So how do we engage with participants to be more stakeholders in the scientific journey than necessarily just resources? And so we build out privacy-first infrastructure to help support, to your point, authentication, consenting, different frameworks to engage with bodies in human subject research.
Excellent, thank you. And we have a guest participant on today's panel, Dr. Owais Durrani, one of my close friends. Owais, please, a quick introduction.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm a practicing emergency medicine physician in Houston, Texas, and finished residency 5 years ago. I was always you could call me a tech nerd, and I was like, well, let me see what the innovation that's happening in my day job is, and that's healthcare, obviously. And that was right around kind of when blockchain was hitting the scene, and so graduated residency at the perfect time where I got to learn about how decentralized technologies are impacting healthcare, and then obviously over the last few years, AI has been kind of the name of the game and how it's impacted my day-to-day in the ER to kind of broader hospital things to even kind of meet even 10,000 foot in the sky, kind of where healthcare is going in 5 to 10 years. So I'm just a student of all the innovation happening.
Yeah, it's fantastic. By the way, I love the fact that, we have a real life, real McCoy ER physician with your degree of interest and just intrinsic motivation in tech and innovation, and not just, it's not just like last year or two or anything. Ever since I've known you for 6, 7 years now, just very impressed with that. I know you were just recently at Vive and a couple of months ago at Health. So you're really kind of, you're out there really understanding this. You have your own podcast, Non-Fungible Human, and some other things that you do. So yeah, kudos to you, because it's great to see. I think, this is a time, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in context of patients, but I think we need to exercise our agency, including providers, physicians. There's a lot going on, and we can't just, hope for the best. I think we need to be really engaged. That being said, so what is safe AI? I think that's kind of a, maybe the key running theme for us today. I will tell you that I want to hear your individual definitions. It's not maybe just specifically one thing. I will tell you from my perspective, and we are developers of software in this space, is at the very least, can you prove what it is that you're claiming, with AI? Can I prove that if I'm saying that the model is private, that it is private, that the infrastructure for it is private, that it's not, it's not just a wrapper for ChatGPT and all the processing is being done on a public infrastructure? Can I prove where the data came from? Like, whose data is it? Can I show sovereignty of the data? We don't make any claims whatsoever on data. The data is either our public health jurisdiction partners, counties, states, or as patients. We're not a data aggregator. We just don't believe in that principally. But to prove it, it's a different thing. Can we prove what kind of transactions we took? Like, for scrubbing documents or indexing them or chunking them or whatever it is we're doing. There's in healthcare, there's a lot of de-siloing things that have to happen and kind of showing that. And obviously, data training is a big part of really making AI useful. So that's really, I think, there's some other things, governance and various other things. But I would say from at least, kind of our perspective, those are some of the critical things. Jelani, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think I take a lot of the same points, right? The auditability trail. I think the first marker of what would be qualified as a safe technology is the ability to understand exactly how it operates, being able to go back and check. And I think, whether it be blockchain or other technologies, I think what we need now is this de-obfuscation of the tech that we actually leverage. And I think we now have the sophistication to allow for that. So auditability is one, but then also guardrails and safeguards. So human in the loop is often a term that we hear in the AI space. And I think that is another hallmark, fundamental pillar of what would be considered a safe AI. So we can have these automation pipelines that we need to help bring, whether it be in health or in tech or in innovation, research or innovation, moving things forward, but have these kind of breakpoints where humans are ultimately the vetters of what is the next step to go forward. And then, I'm sure we'll touch upon this in conversation, but transparency, which is also a component of auditability and then being able to check and view. So there are a number of pillars that I think exist out there, but all of these kind of come together to, in my perspective, to give rise to safe tech, right? Stay future-proof tech.
Yeah, I love it. Always, how about yourself? I'm always intrigued, like from like a different perspective, provider's perspective. Somebody obviously use all kinds of technologies, but maybe first of all, like how do you use AI technologies in your day-to-day, kind of world? And then like what does safe AI maybe mean to you from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think the cool thing about emergency medicine is hype doesn't work, right? Like you have a bunch of patients, it's a very high stress environment. Any AI tool actually has to like make an impact. And so, in some other fields or areas, there may be like some tools where you may get promise of like, oh, this and this in like a year or 2 years. Well, in ER, that doesn't matter. And so some of the kind of practical tools I use is AI scribes, right? It's an app on my phone, go in the room, let the patient know, hey, this app's going to help me record our conversation so I can focus on you and help me document. And that's basically it. I come out of the room and the notes, even over the last 2 years that I've been using it, have gone better and better and better. So that's a common tool I use. Another common tool I use is chart summarization. So obviously we see, very complex patients that may have a 8-year cancer history. There's no way I can catch up on that in the 5 minutes I have in from my computer before I go into that room. And so the chart kind of summarizing the pertinent points of they come in with chest pain, obviously giving me an overview of their history, but then giving me some highlights from issues they may have had that led to chest pain in the past. That could be heart related, that could be fluid buildup on their lungs, that could be pneumonia, whatever the case may be. And so those tools really making me more efficient at my job and better at my job. And then I guess some of the more cooler things that maybe you see on a TV show or whatnot would be like, some patient gets a chest x-ray and they have like a collapsed lung. There's certain devices that will automatically recognize that, automatically alert me where I can kind of go into that room immediately and say, hey, yeah, that does look like a collapsed lung. Let's place a chest tube and kind of fix that. So very kind of practical tools. There's a few others we can get into later. But for me, when we talk about safe AI, I always think back to like there's still literally fax machines and pagers used in the healthcare industry. And we're probably the ones keeping those companies alive. And the reason for that, there's probably many reasons, but one of the core reasons is it's safe and it's reliable and it's HIPAA compliant and it's going to work every time. And it's worked for the last 50 years and it's probably going to work for another 50 years. And so that level of reliability to me is safe technology. And so safe AI is essentially similar to that, right? Can I really rely on this tool to not give me a wrong answer or hallucinate or lead me down the wrong pathway when it really matters? And so that is one component. And then Jelani, you kind of alluded to it, the human in the loop. So I was talking to someone the other day. It was like a patient advocate, and he was talking about how he has a heart history, went to his cardiologist at a hospital, they kind of cleared him of things. This hospital was piloting a program where it was kind of uploading EKGs and patient data into a system. And if it noticed something abnormal, it was using like autonomous AI kind of calling to the patients. And so he went to his cardiologist's office like a week before. They said, "Hey, everything's stable for you." A week later, he gets a call from this bot saying, "Hey, there's been signs based on some recent tests that you had a heart attack. You need to come immediately to the office." And so he was freaking out. He called his office and they were like, "Oh no, this system just kind of recognized abnormals with your stuff. For the doctor says that's your baseline, but obviously there was no human in the loop. Something happened where the data was uploaded. It freaked him out, caused chaos, and so to me, that's not safe AI, right? And it's not safety in terms of his data being lost or whatnot, but it's still safety in terms of his health, his mental health, and whatnot. So kind of a long answer, but those are kind of the components that go into kind of my assessment of is this technology that's ready for healthcare? Is it safe or not really?
Yeah, this is really your point about faxes is actually really quite interesting because yeah, even though I think most of us kind of, you know, just dismiss it as being some archaic thing that only happens in healthcare, you make the point that actually it is reliable. If it gets there, it is considered to be, code safe and HIPAA compliant and things like this. And most of us maybe in tech don't necessarily have that frame of reference, or at least, we don't really think about it in that way. Um, and I think that this idea of human in the loop is a really, really important concept. It's one that to me is yeah, that there's multiple ways in which you can look at it, but one element that I know that we're involved with is, as an example, when we're working with pathologists or medical examiners, and we're taking autopsy data or investigative narratives, toxicology files, things like this, and we're doing the data training, is really to have them involved in, like, do the answers, do this generative AI answers that we have, kind of helped develop, do they make sense? Like this idea of reinforcement learning using human feedback. Um, but I think what you always what you mentioned, about kind of these false alarms and AI decisions that may not really, at least may socially not make sense, even if medically they might somewhat make sense. That's a really important concept too, and now I'm actually reflecting on something we have built for a client of ours in Africa, where we're looking at the genomic sequence of a patient, and we're kind of simultaneously comparing some of the gene variants with what's on ClinVar, and creating these alerts. Not saying go and see a waste, but just alerts saying, we think that this particular gene variant, that there's some signs that a provider should have a look at it, because it could be, based on the data that we're looking at, the AI says that this could be a potential area of concern. But even with that, now I'm thinking, maybe we have to go about socializing that a little bit differently, because now I think the way you put it out, it can create a lot of stress, even if it's done in kind of a very benign way. It may be less helpful than more, if not done properly. So yeah, really interesting. I think we could probably talk about implications of safe AI, quite a bit, but I do want to kind of go back to something that I think all of us mentioned a little bit. Uh, and it's really like, where is AI, where is rather data in AI? So I think all of us probably know that when it comes to the models, these frontier models, there's really like four or five companies at most that are doing anything that really are developing that. Right? So OpenAI and Anthropic and you got some open source options and things like this. But really is the playpen of very, very, very kind of resourceful tech companies, generally speaking, DeepSeek and a couple other models notwithstanding. Then there's compute, and I think probably all of us in the world these days, have had to have had your head, in the sand, not to have heard of cost and environmental impact of these gigantic data centers. And but really compute, I would say, is very, very centralized, and probably not something that really concerns at least us in this panel, or in our daily lives. However, this idea of how do we, kind of do data training using data that we have access to or our patients have access to with AI. I think that is a pretty relevant topic. I think that's maybe the most relevant topic. So, always, maybe we'll start with you. I know you deal with a lot of patients, but you see this concept of health data all kinds of different ways, including, gate kept maybe through some EHR vendors or insurers and things like this. But all to say, what is data sovereignty from your perspective in healthcare? Like, who do you think owns the data? What's the implications in terms of AI from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I think traditionally hospitals own the data, right? Like ever since I've been in medicine, and I'm sure both of you have had this experience. Maybe you go to one hospital system or clinic system, and then you decide to go to a different one, or your insurance is forcing you to go to a different one. And it's the biggest challenge to get your data over there and your medical records over there. And back to what we were talking about, they're probably gonna have to fax it over, and it's gonna take weeks, and then they're gonna have to like upload it into a system. It's just a nightmare. And so obviously in that situation, I don't feel like I own my data. Then you go to the flip side, and this has actually been happening over the last few weeks with I forget if it's Claude and who else, but obviously there's lots of big things happening, and so now they're making it easier to like download your history from like one system, upload it to the other, and you can restart because that's like the biggest obstacle for people who may be using one platform versus the other. They have that memory feature and they don't want to lose that. And I think of, that. And for the first time, I'm like, oh, wow, like, to some extent, I have some control over that data. Now, do I truly own that? No, right? Both of these companies or whoever has it can do whatever they want with it and study. But I still feel like a degree of ownership that honestly is lacking in healthcare. And so for me, when it comes to data ownership and PHI ownership in healthcare, it needs to be more where at a flip of a switch, I could say, hey, hospital A, it was great working with you. Thanks for taking care of me. But at this point, I'm going to move there, and I don't want you to have access to this or potentially do research with this or train your models with this. We're seeing more and more EMR companies, electronic medical record companies that are modeled as EMR companies, but their true job is to kind of data mine and go through all the data that they have and, sell that to research companies, pharma companies, gather insights, sell that to all types of people. And, that's not how they market themselves if you go to their website, but that's actually what's happening. And so in that case, the patient doesn't own that data. Have they given permission for those things to be done? Probably not. And so, unfortunately, up until this point, data ownership for patients' private records has been in the hands of institutions. And the fact that, I would say probably in the last 5 years with, blockchain and whatnot, those conversations started happening. Now they're happening more and more, obviously, throughout the years. And so for me, it's a point of optimism where we're actually having the conversation. Patients are actually aware, like, oh, this is something that, is mine and very personal to me and is valuable. And I should have control over it. And hopefully we get to a place where that becomes reality.
Yeah, yeah. You actually raised a really interesting point, Oais, because I know about your background and you create a lot of content, and obviously we know about your regular day job, but as an ER physician. But so I've seen this in recent times, over the last year or so, that content creators, authors, explicitly put, that I do not consent for any AI to be trained from my content. Like literally, you see this. So I'm kind of intrigued, and this was taking a step back. This was kind of in the news like a year ago, maybe, where there was these like startups where effectively they were trying to like create, I'm gonna say like a mini OAS, like a yeah, like a virtual doctor or virtual nurse, but trained, if you like, on your persona. So I'm just intrigued on your kind of spin on data sovereignty in that context, where you're like the content creator or you're the actual provider persona. How do you feel about it? And how do you like what are some practical things that you think you would do in this context of maybe consenting or not consenting?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm always curious about that when if you write like I do not consent to yeah, yeah. Like I don't think that changes anything. I think it's on their platform. They could do whatever they
Yeah.
want. So there's probably a better way to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think avatars and kind of creating like mini me's of various people and whatnot. People are trying to do that. Personally, I feel like we're just not there yet. Like I think I see healthcare as a very kind of human thing, and we have a huge access issue in healthcare. And I think a big conversation is how do we use AI and these technologies to bridge that access gap, which is, I think, a good thing to do. But I think we completely then ignored the other part of the conversation of how do we fix the human to human access issue, right? We are there's a recent prescription pilot in Utah where you can if you've been like on a certain blood pressure medication, there's a list of approved medications. You can get like a auto refill and AI will refill it for you. And yes, it's solving a problem of people not being able to get a primary care doctor or be able to see him or get appointments. But it's also, from my perspective, a band-aid where that patient is now going to go longer without seeing a physical doctor, and eventually they're going to have to see one, right? At some point, some illness is going to hit us all, and we're going to have to see one. And it's not good if you are having a cancer diagnosis and you're 55 and it's the first time you're seeing a physical person that's a provider in like 6 years. Do you have trust with them? Are you going to trust what they say? Probably not if it's the first time you're seeing them versus if it's a doctor that you've had a relationship for 20 years and they're like, hey, go to this specialist. They're the best. I've sent a bunch of patients, great outcomes. You're going to trust that. You're going to go to that specialist. And so what it's going to do, I think, is, on the front end, close this, access gap, but then we're going to ignore the core issue, and it's going to lead to a trust gap on the back end, which I think is going to lead to possibly poor outcomes. So I think, back to your original question of avatars or trying to recreate, doctors or dietitians or providers. On the short end, I think it's going to provide temporary access and people will feel good about it. We've seen that in the mental health space. But I think when those true emergencies happen, and when you have to make those huge decisions on do I go with treatment A or B or do I get the surgery, we're going to be at a loss of trust and being confident in the decisions we make. And I hope it doesn't lead to poor outcomes, but I fear that is what will happen.
Yeah.
No, I have to double click on that, right? I think that compared to other spaces, the application of AI, especially in the context of safe AI in the medical space, always is going to have to be a behind the scenes type thing. Like it'll never be, or we're not anywhere near the point where you can have AI as an interface where people can interface with to get diagnostics or to kind of refine their journey through the medical system. I think it always has to be almost like an accompanying diagnostic tool, right? But in the context of a healthcare professional, it's an accompanying healthcare professional. It's your little assistant that helps support you in your interaction with a participant, right? Even Jim, in your example of leveraging AI to help with diagnostics using ClinVar, for example, right? We know that our genomics libraries are gapped all the way through, right? Variants of unknown significance are all throughout our genomic libraries, and these are our reference genomes. And so there's a lot more things that we don't know in the human biomedical space than there are things that we do know. I know the world doesn't really know that, or patients don't actually know that. But as professionals in the space, we know that there are a lot of empty spaces that need to be filled. And the advent of I think, is a useful tool to pull out those spaces and help to kind of fill in those spaces to a certain extent, or at least make those spaces more aware. But it's not a tool to replace the individual like OAS or whoever your favorite healthcare provider is. We're not at that point.
Yeah, yeah, you make a really good point, Jelani. It's funny. I was thinking, as always, you were saying, kind of, you were telling your narrative. I was thinking, man, this reminds me of all the reasons back in like 2016 why blockchain, because there's a fundamental trust issue in healthcare. Like, and a lot of it, comes from, the data is not in one place, the siloed, we all know that this space is under-resourced when it comes to people like yourself and things like this. And part of the whole, like the VC, the technocrats thing for AI for healthcare as well, is under-resourced. And, we can't mushroom 10,000 physicians overnight, things like this, which I think is a little bit self-serving. But Jelani, I kind of want you to continue a little bit because I want you to maybe, and I know you have a very strong clinical background, clinical research, just talk to me a little bit more about, um, I guess, like data sovereignty and from a clinical research perspective, but also from a trust perspective, because I know we're ultimately this whole thing is under the pinning of decentralized technologies. But I think there's a lot of like really interesting threads, some of which we may have to pick up at a different talk.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what angle in specifics you want to go on with the clinical space. But trust in just data ownership, data sovereignty in the clinical context is very, very different, right?
Yeah.
This is you're moving to the space where you have big power players that are sponsoring, putting in a lot of money to get access to specific data and generate said data in a very competitive commercial space. The conversations around and the regulatory context around what is owned by whom takes on a very, very different conversational space than, I'm a participant. I'm going to see a clinician. I'm generating data around my health. That's one context. Once it leaves that space and now you're talking to hospitals that are, or EHR companies that are data mining this data and then selling it to other providers for them to then run feasibility and help power clinical studies. Yeah, conversations around who owns what, how it gets owned, who is the ultimate beneficiary of the long-term investment in that takes on different shapes. So in the pharma space, in the clinical space, he who has the money, he who generates the data is ultimately legally the owner of that data. Now, you can have conversations on return of findings to participants, and I think people would be surprised how much pharma companies, traditional pharma companies are actually keen to have this discussion around giving back to the people who participate in them. There are regulations that prohibit them from doing so, but that doesn't mean that they don't necessarily want to, right? And I think what we're running into, or what you sometimes run into, is these people, these entities look malicious because they don't seem to act in a way that may necessarily obviously seem beneficent to people, but they're also shackled between, regulatory frameworks that prohibit them from doing that. So for those who don't know, if you're a pharma company and you're looking to run a clinical trial in a cohort, you're blinded to know who these people are. Like, I don't know it's you, Jim Nasr. I just have a little code that says this individual has these characteristics. They've responded to this way to this clinical trial drug and dot. There's no way for me to be able to, even if I wanted to, return findings to you, give you updates, give you preferential discount to any potential therapies that we generate against you. No benefit sharing can actually happen by virtue of privacy laws. And so I think with the advent of, not I think, with the advent of novel cryptographic technology that can allow you to still communicate with somebody without having to unblind them, de-identify them. This is now where we're starting to have conversations with big pharma players in saying that you can return benefit to these people. You can return ownership. You can engage them in the conversation around governance of what is being generated against what they've contributed. And then that I think builds, if not trust, but confidence, right? The ability to confidently participate in an arena where you previously weren't able to before. So, that's where I'm starting to see, or that's where the conversations have been gone. And I myself, I'm not a clinician scientist. I'm a regular scientist. And I also coming into this space was like, I don't see why pharma would ever, or why anybody in the clinical space would ever really want to do that. But there are a lot of very big name groups that are very keen to find ways to be able to return value and not just extract value from the people that they're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, again, we can talk about this quite a bit. And I know probably all of us have actually maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I know always, I remember distinctly we talked about this whole idea of NFTs for clinical research and this idea of using zero knowledge proofs, still, kind of honoring the double blind clinical study and all the things that you mentioned, Jelani, but also using some of these decentralized technologies to give, at least allow the patient data owners to have some monitoring, if not, some incentivization through the process and yes, be HIPAA compliant, yes, like be privacy, PII, kind of manage all that, yes, be able to create aggregated data sets that meet the needs, all of that. So I think again, it's a conversation we probably all had. I think it is still relevant, but also I think we also all know that there are some serious gatekeepers in the space. We just don't want to have that happen. It is it's going to significantly impact, obviously, at the very least, the data aggregator's business. And that's a big issue because to me, in some ways, at least in the US, you know, we hear from HHS as example. It's been in the news. Hey, let's with HDI 5. We're really gonna this time seriously. We're really gonna, like enforce information on blocking, and we're really gonna get like these big EHRs to play along and whatever. But even so, I still feel like when they push you to like a Commonwealth or whatever, care quality and things like this, TEFCA, they're still significantly centralized and gatekept and very, very costly that effectively make it difficult to do any of the things that we're talking about. So I personally, not to digress too much, but I think those are still like ruses that they're not really solutions. However, the stuff that we're talking about, I think that technically or conceptually they're solutions, but they have no adoption or very little adoption. So there's a practical element, and in a way, so I actually want to kind of go back to, and I think this is a really big topic. We could spend hours on it, but I personally feel that what you describe, with people not going into Claude or ChatGPT health, and of course, they're spending a lot of money on this and marketing to it, actually could be the inertia change, that the trigger to getting people to use their agency for health data, not just in this context. Because I feel like if that's happening now, all of a sudden there's a behavioral change because people are, I don't know if they're quote taking control of their health data, but they're doing more with their health data than just passively let it happen to them. So I don't know if you guys have a feedback or comment about that, but that's one of the things I believe. I kind of feel like that this actually, in some ways, could be a positive thing, though. Of course, there's a lot of like safety and other kind of concerns too.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It's all about like, now a patient comes in and they're like, "Oh, what's the hospital's app so I can download it so I can see my results," right? Like that would have been unheard of, 10, 15 years ago, but every company has an app, so everyone just assumes there's an app for whatever place you're at. You can now, if you're admitted to the hospitals, order your meals from your phone, right? Another common thing that people do everywhere in hospitals are like, "Oh yeah, maybe we should do it." So same thing. If they get into that habit of like, oh, I can actually download my records and it's easy, and even now when you go to a hospital's portal to look at your results, you can't download or anything. You could print out those results, and they're going to come out in weird formatting, and a good luck then trying to show that to another provider who's going to be able to easily read them. So yeah, it's all about, I think, pattern building, and even if you look within healthcare, right? If you're trying to have someone lose weight or have better diet habits and whatnot. It's about pattern building and looking at what the motivation is and those small steps. And so you take that framework to their day to day. And I remember even in like 2012, you could download all your data off of Facebook and delete it, but like that data was like you couldn't do anything with it, right? It was all like numbers and weird things, and it was like really useless to the everyday person. But now you can actually download data from these AI companies or whatnot, and it is useful because then you can upload it to another platform and everything's there already. And so, yeah, I agree. I think it's like starting a conversation and opening this box, and hopefully it translates into people, taking ownership of their health data.
Yeah.
So I have a very measured approach to this. I think the framework of interoperability that is brought up here, where being able to move across different systems that are independently siloed, I think that is the best use case for this. But much like in the realm of genetics, you have a genetic counselor. You can't return, clinically actionable findings to an individual because they don't have the sophistication to be able to interpret that effectively. We, even before all this, we have people who are dumping their data into ChatGPT, getting a diagnosis, and then running along with it, right? I think that there needs to be not I think there needs to be a measured approach when it comes to people being able to pull down their data, even if it's laymanized diagnostic data or your health data, then understanding what are the bounds with which this makes sense, right? It shouldn't be on them, or there needs to be, I think, social guardrails in place. And I think this is a great topic for this conversation where we have AI, and I think safe AI factors in aspects that are not only tech leaning, right? This is a
Yeah.
socio-technological shift. And I think we need to, as we double down on this technology, we also need to double down on the social aspect that allows this to be done in a very safe way. People are not the best custodians of their own data. People are not necessarily sophisticated enough, or not, because I don't want to say intelligent, they're not knowledgeable enough on the topic to be able to come to proper conclusions. And I can imagine, and I already see it, dealing with clinicians who have people who come in with, their data and they say, well, this is the issue that I have. And your clinician will tell, or a clinician will tell you, let's run a few tests. Let's maybe delve into this further and almost try to educate the individual, but they already feel like they know, and they'll go off and maybe do something else that isn't in line with the proper diagnostic or the proper treatment pathways that would be available to them. And so, as we open up the health sciences space, as we try to make space to invite more people to be a part of health and take ownership over their health, I think there's a concerted effort that needs to be put into then education of these individuals, of all individuals, and understanding how this should and should not be used. And to me, that is the paradigm of safe technology across the board that has to happen.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
Jelani,
no,
oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
no, I was, yeah, no, I was excited by what you said. I 100% agree. There's like so many bad actors, just like right now today. We're not even in that place right now. And there's all these wellness people that are selling you like 300 tests that you can buy on their website. Like, what are you going to do with that? Now, the evolution of that, unfortunately, is going to be like you kind of alluded to, like, oh, get all your health data from this health system, upload it onto our platform, and we're going to give you this and make all these bold promises and sell you our supplement. And this thing's going to make this better and bring this level down. And yeah, I 100% agree. There has to be guardrails because we are already in a very dangerous place when it comes to misinformation and bad information out there and wellness grifters. And this could potentially put that on steroids if not done in a cautious and responsible way.
Yeah.
No doubt. This whole you guys know, I think I mentioned this to you guys at a different time. We're doing some work in this open science arena around the Wim Hof method and cancer related information. But there is, man, you go on to like Instagram or whatever, that there's like 100 influencers trying to sell you all kinds of like vagus nerve, all kinds of breathing, all kinds of like little tools or little programs, all this like garbage. There's a lot of like bro science. It's interesting because I've talked to a number of physicians like yourself always about this. I think that they're in some ways, I think they're like dismissive. They do call it bro science and which I think is actually, it's not really like, to me, yes, that may be their clinical perspective on it, but it's not reality based because a lot of people are actually doing this. So you can't deny that it's not happening. I think that's not a good approach. But who's out there to try and actually put some kind of like quality, kind of like the supplement industry, like some kind of quality assurance on it. Because right now it's just like the wild, wild west, and anyone can make any kind of a claim. Like yeah, with Dr. Kevin Tracy, who spent 30 years doing, VNS development and has an FDA approved product, and versus like me, I go on Instagram and just, hey, I have this $25 whatever thing they put on your ear. And so it's weird. It's a really interesting thing. I do want to kind of go back to it. I kind of feel like, again, we've opened up the can of worms, but it's cool because I think it's important. But this change of behavior and whether or not it's clinically, whether everything is safeguarded as it needs to be or not, I think also opens up a huge, huge, huge area of data privacy, which I think, and it's not just healthcare related, of course. I think we're all compromising our data privacy, but I think this is a huge element within safe AI, and having practices that really protect privacy. And I think with health data, that to me, that is the number one unintended consequence that's going to happen for an individual. So Jelani, I want to kind of ask you a question. In terms of safe AI, maybe as the last little kind of double click on this. Talk to me a little bit in context of privacy on how do we do like safe AI in terms of data training? How do we do safe AI in terms of memory, of the AI?
I actually don't know how to answer that question, to be very honest with you.
Too
So,
complicated, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. So, I work in the AI space, but I'm nowhere near the engineering side of these things. I'm more the scientific implementation. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Type of space. So I
I have
defer.
some ideas about it, but by no means exhaustive. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually don't know. I have no idea how exactly to answer that question.
yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. It's to me, there's no one thing that I think it's a sequence of a number of things you have to do. I think some of which we've already talked about, such as using, cryptographic, like audit trails and attestations of the different steps that we do, particularly like the steps that are like really constant, like the infrastructure, pieces, like for instance, like removing centralization of everything. So even as in terms of like the learning, making it more of a federated learning from multiple nodes from different places that are governed differently, not all of it done, through OpenAI and all of it done in one way. But it's not it's a non-trivial answer is what I would say. And of course, when it comes to affecting individuals like actions. I mean, that's a whole different thing because I think largely consumers still don't practice any kind of like real, privacy preservation or really safe interaction with AI.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole process tree as you brought up, man, that you give that we talk about that is of importance here. I think, the kind of trade-off with the centralization is data quality, right? When you're pulling from, especially in the medical space, if you're pulling from multiple federated ecosystems that are all self-governed, there's an issue around data harmonization, data standardization, and the quality of which is being input from these various parts. Right. That's a one set of conversations. But in terms of data privacy from an individual perspective, like, yes, to your point, people don't practice proper privacy safety mechanisms or privacy safety practices with themselves. I don't think that we're at the point where we can rely on the individual to reinforce the privacy necessary for themselves. They don't know how to do so. And it almost, that's why you have some of these, or that's why you have a lot of these centralized entities because they are tasked to make sure that that happens. So and we'll have these conversations going around. I'm actually not a huge proponent of just blanket decentralization. I don't think either of you are either. But it is a conversation that oftentimes, or it is a topic that comes up. What is decentralization? What is federation? And how and when does that need to come into place? I think that centralization serves its purpose. And it's more about defining and redefining what are the bounds of which that purpose resides. I think with the advent of new technologies, those things start to shift, right? The facts as a reliable tool to make sure that thing gets from point A to point B in an encrypted way is great. We have new tools that allow us to do that, and it's worthwhile to assess that based off of these new parameters that they're dealing with. So I think this opens up, another series of conversations around what it actually means to be privacy first or privacy leaning in the application of this technology.
Yeah, and I agree with you. So that's actually a good segue, and maybe we only have a few minutes left on this call. But good segue to talk about decentralization and how does that fit into all this stuff? Because there's a lot, there's a lot going on with AI and how we get to safe AI. I will tell you that I mentioned this at the beginning. We have practiced this for many years, and now for the last couple of years in terms of AI, which is really all about verifiable data, right? And like this using decentralized technologies, mainly blockchain technologies, to show, kind of like data authenticity and also kind of like, once we have access to data, what is the provenance? Like, who did what when, all managed, all basically attested, privately on a public blockchain. So we have done that for a long time at Acore, and now we're continuing to do that with in terms of the AI piece. So essentially verifiable AI. I think that's a step in the right direction. It is decentralized. I will tell you that like many times when you talk about decentralized things, people immediately think about like governance. They talk about DAOs. Well, we have this DAO and whatever. And personally speaking, I kind of feel like that's one of these things where it's been way oversold. That I have seen less really effective DAOs, maybe one or two or three, not that many, than the many thousands or tens of thousands that people have talked about. And for a number of reasons, I think complexity is one, actual execution, another, ill-conceived governance. So the governance was actually, yes, you use some kind of a DAO, but really it wasn't the planning for the governance wasn't done properly. So it doesn't matter if you use DAO now or not. So I've seen some of these things, but I'm intrigued, like from you guys' perspective, where you see decentralization fit into this space, particularly with AI.
I think on the AI side is the most prominent one. Right, to your point, centralized. So pick your favorite AI company. People dumping all of their data or data being sourced and funneled into these one places is just a recipe for, or can be a recipe for disaster. We've seen this on a number of occasions. The ability for individuals to be able to pick and choose which AI companies, which LM developers, which databases they want to contribute to, I think is where the conversation around decentralization has to come. Now, there's the trade-off of that in terms of quality, right? And decentralized frameworks, much more difficult to spin up. Will they be able to confer the same amount of quality to an individual? Therefore, kind of just tailoring individuals towards these more centralized options because they're faster, better, and they perform. These are all kind of conversations, but I think ultimately, the argument for decentralization from the AI tech side, I think, as it relates to so somebody's data sovereignty and privacy ownership, is an important conversation. I just don't know which, if we have that solution in place for those individuals quite yet.
What do you think, Owen?
Yeah, I think it's going to be almost something that's evolving, right? I think it's like for lack of a better analogy, like government, right? At some points, if you feel unsafe, your perspective may be, I want a stronger government to keep me safe. Other points you may be, I live in a really safe society. I want kind of the shackles off. I don't want to live in a surveillance state. So similar with healthcare, right? I think from my perspective, I think it's related to trust. Right now, trust in healthcare is not great compared to, if you look at trend lines over the past. And so I think when that trust in the institution is low, the appetite for decentralization from the patient perspective is going to be higher, right? I want to be able to move my data. I want to be able to see what's being done with my data. On the flip side, if you, say live in like a Scandinavian country and things are going really well when it comes to healthcare and you trust the system and whatnot, maybe it's not something you worry about that much and you're okay with things being not as decentralized and one entity or institution having all of your data because you trust that. And so I think from my perspective it's something that is going to vary country by country and how much trust they have within the healthcare system, and it's going to be related to that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No,
No, I
actually,
think it is. Yeah,
no,
go
I know
ahead.
we don't have a lot of time, but I really like that answer, right? And I think that it also begs the question, what does decentralization mean to different people, right? Like I actually don't imagine a world where someone's like, you know what, today my government's kind of pissing me off. I want to go and decentralize my processes, right? People on the day-to-day don't have that wherewithal, that capacity. Like that's not what they're thinking. And so ultimately, what is the benefit here that we're talking about decentralization, right? As we have this conversation in front of people, what is the benefit of actually decentralizing? I think that then guides the conversation towards what aspects should, along the tech stack, along the governance stack, along the regulatory stack, should be decentralized and which one shouldn't. I think we need more regulatory bodies. Personally, I think that a broader spectrum of decentralized regulatory bodies that then can all weigh in and determine what actually makes sense is probably better than just one central entity that says, yes, this is a go and this is not a go. Um, so yeah, great point.
Jelani, you make a really good point. I would say from my perspective, like the thing I worry about the most in terms of AI safety is the centralization of the ultimate power. I personally feel like AI is largely controlled by four or five, billionaires, almost all of whom are boomers, none of whom I would trust. I would not trust Sam Altman, with AGI. I don't think he would have my well-being in mind. I think he would have his well-being in mind, but not mine. So that to me, like my personal point of view is, and I'm not picking on him specifically, but it's just indicative of that, this kind of like AGI at any cost, you know, we're here to, in a race to beat China as opposed to in a going back to a comment in kind of a um with a meticulous eye on impact, like a balanced point of view on impact on humans and our environment. I kind of feel like there's a lot of that. So that's where my personal concerns are. I think I like the idea of more regulators, but I also know, since I've worked with the government, I know all of us have, is that the current set of regulators are woefully underinformed. Honestly, I don't think particularly intrinsically motivated. Many of them, like we know this at the FDA. I mean, they've kind of got the end of cycle, and the agency has not brought in new talent. So anyway, I'm not. I think conceptually it's a good idea, but in practical terms, especially as we've seen, that like take off the rail guards, AI, you guys can do whatever you want. uh, it doesn't look good. I think, like I see in Europe as example with Mika and some of the other things that are happening, that there is, there is a focus on regulation. You could argue that as an entrepreneur, they're over-regulating because it's stifling business. Um, Perhaps, it will be some kind of like a United Nations of AI, like regulation. Because I mean, honestly, I know we kind of joke about it, and unfortunately, right at the minute, we got things like NATO isn't, is in the news all the time. But if AI is conceivably as deadly or could be, like why wouldn't you have that kind of regulatory framework at least at the highest level and trickle it down? But yeah, that may be a conversation for a different time. We have run out of time. I would say for the last quick 30 seconds, from your perspective, like what's next? What's next with AI for you personally?
For me, I think the advent of, to your point, just different sources of data. I think to me the biggest value that AI will bring, and I'm operating large in the research space and also I guess the clinical space, is support of decision making, is support of identification of things faster, basically optimization, efficiency and optimization. Always mentioned it himself, going into the clinic, having hopefully not a sweep of tools, but very pointed tools that come in and get you to diagnostic faster, turn that 15 minutes into an effective hour-long's worth of conversation with an individual, get them to where they need to be, and get them out in a healthier place. I think that's important. I think the diagnostic space and the idea of bringing pre-treatment or prophylactic treatment towards an individual before they get sick, I think is another really important space where AI is going to be extremely valuable in the healthcare space.
Yeah, on my end, I'm excited that you had kind of mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, go to a bunch of these conferences, and a lot of times, say 2 years ago, a lot of the conversation was around hype, is what I would say. These promises and whatnot. And this past year, a lot of it is around like, okay, are these tools actually working? What's the ROI here? Obviously, money has to be a part of the conversation. What's the patient impact here? Are clinicians adopting these tools? And so things are actually being measured, which I'm happy about. Because, 2 years ago, it was all about, well, we're going to promise this is going to do this. And there was like no tangible way of getting there, or you didn't know what was hype versus reality. And I think we're having a lot more like that shine is kind of worn off. And it's more like, is this actually working for us? How is it working? And that kind of excites me because I'm someone who likes to look at the data, look at the results rather than broad promises of, things that may or may not happen.
Yeah, I like it. I will say from my end, I like that. I think with AI and particularly safer AI, things such as, you know, data, like taking actions to protect patients' data sovereignty, that we could actually do far lower costs, more transparent clinical research, the open science research. Maybe not everything. I mean, at least some preclinical research, some of the things you guys know, that this open science stuff that we've been doing. I feel like AI is actually a significant accelerator for it if used correctly. And we can get to analytics. We can do, we could do radiology with AI at far lower cost and hiring a top radiologist, things like this. So those things excite me. I think they're part of the solution. And if people like us can bring in some of the rail guards and some of the transparency and some of the provability and attestations and giving value back to actual owners of the data. I think, why not? Why wouldn't that be a good thing? So I'm excited about those things. But anywho, really appreciate everybody's time. I think we have exceeded our limit, but yeah, this is the kind of thing I think we're going to have to get back together, get our little band together, and keep talking about it. There's a lot of stuff there. There are many, many things I didn't even talk about. We didn't even for a second talk about the compute and cost of compute and all of the impact, and frankly, the kind of nation state safety and concerns that creates and so on. But there's a lot to be talked about, and I think healthcare, man, this is to me this is the most important area for really understanding how to do stuff safely, and anyway, I will just as the last reminder for our audience, this is all as part of our commitment to this coalition for decentralized health and life sciences, people in the industry getting together and trying to figure out how do we use some decentralized technologies to improve solutions, maybe lower costs, improve transparency, and make treatments more effective. Anyway, I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.